Hello, and welcome to my Teacher Journeys 2021 presentation. My name is Jamie G. Sturges. I'm an instructor at Rikkyo University, and my topic is Neurodivergent and Teaching in the Time of COVID-19. At the end of this presentation, I'll return to PowerPoint to show you some resources that have been helpful for me and tips that might be helpful for you as well. I have been teaching for 15 years in the United States and in Japan. And over the past 15 years, I've gained a lot of experience in creating detailed, sometimes wordy lesson plans to help me avoid ambiguity with my students. I've always been able to keep things extremely organized, though topics such as multitasking and interpersonal communication with colleagues have always been difficult. And it always been put down to maybe I was distracted, I didn't have my mind on what I was doing, I was socially awkward or shy or introverted, and many other words got bandied about. After multiple sessions of explaining situations where I couldn't focus on a task or I was under or overstimulated and not so many words, I was initially diagnosed with ADHD. In fall of 2019. I then went and got a second, more formal diagnosis, and I was diagnosed with not just ADHD, but also autism spectrum disorder. I was 38 years old at the time. And while it did explain a lifetime of social quirks and other areas where I'd forever struggled and tried to create habits to make me more normal, these diagnoses made me realize it's not that I would never get there, it would just take continued concentrated effort and practice. And that is something that I've had to carry with me, especially in the past 3 semesters of teaching online and a little bit of face-to-face. What I'd like to focus on are the past 3 semesters of teaching here in Japan, all of which happened after I was diagnosed. So I was already kind of going over my entire life and how I dealt with things prior to being diagnosed. And now I was working through that in addition to having to shift to an unknown online teaching environment. In spring 2020, my university delayed its semester by a few weeks so that instructors could prepare to shift to teaching online. Hardly any of us had any online teaching experience, and I was moved into a position where not only I had to learn, but I also had to help guide other instructors on these new platforms. I needed concrete answers, I needed deadlines, I needed assurances, and I didn't always receive those, which made things extremely stressful for me, even more so. But knowing that I wasn't alone and I had some other instructors that I could at least ask questions to did make things a little bit easier. Within the online classroom, one of the challenges that I faced up front was that my internet connection at home was not stable. So for the first semester, I ended up teaching my online classes from my office on campus. And though this wasn't ideal under COVID-19 circumstances and that I was going out when I didn't need to and I wasn't technically teleworking, it did help accommodate me and ease and making the transition from teaching students in a classroom face-to-face to teaching exclusively online. It created kind of a halfway point. It helped me continue to have a routine where I got up, went through the routine of getting ready for work, going to work, teaching, though not in a classroom, and then coming home. So it helped me continue to have those solid boundaries in place. And I was still able to maintain my social skills because I was still able to occasionally see other teachers and administrative staff on campus. So it did have a little bit of normalcy. Also, while teaching online, I was able to fully make use of using noise canceling headphones. It helped me concentrate more on teaching classes, and it helped me not get distracted by any outside noises. Another thing that was helpful in that first semester is that for one of our classes, we gave instructors the option of either teaching all 10 students for 90 minutes or do 2 40-minute sessions where 5 students were in one and 5 were in the other. Initially, this was done to help with internet problems and in case we didn't have full access to using Zoom at the time. Even after that was granted, we still gave instructors that choice. I chose it not so much for the internet problem, because I was teaching my classes from campus at that point, but I chose it because it helped me concentrate more on the students speaking. It led to fewer chances of me being overwhelmed by teaching online. It gave me more control over the situation, and it made it less susceptible for me to be distracted because I was only focused on these students, and these students were constantly engaged with me. It also helped me routinize my lessons a lot more quickly. So I was appreciative of using the option for that because it also helped accommodate me, the instructor. In fall semester last year, we were still online for the entire semester. And at that point, I had gotten a new router and I was able to teach from home. This is where the environments of home and work and play were all blurred together into one. Where I'm sitting right now is where I eat and where I teach and where I lesson plan, where I watch TV, play games, study. It all happens here. And being able to transition from one activity, especially from a work activity to a non-work activity, is extremely jarring. And I found that it was difficult for me to move from one thing to another. Multitasking became even more difficult because it was hard to get my brain to concentrate on one thing. Even if I wanted to open up the laptop and check work email, I was easily distracted by watching something on a tablet, checking messages on my phone, realizing I could get up and go to the supermarket anytime I wanted to. So I had to be very strict with myself, but also forgiving and setting boundaries. Some things that helped me accommodate were making sure that the laptop was used just for work. When I wasn't teaching, I would close the laptop and anything that was for entertainment purposes was done on my tablet or on my phone. I also turned off work notifications on my phone so that if I needed to do something work related, including checking email, it was done on the laptop. I also made sure to give myself plenty of warning before our class started. And that included setting alarms 10 minutes before class started, so I had enough time to mask and go into teacher mode. Because when I'm in teacher mode, also in the physical classroom, I become extroverted, I'm attentive, I'm ready to help my students, I'm extremely sociable and accommodating. When teacher mode is off, I become more introverted and withdrawn, difficult to talk to, kind of skittish around other people. Another accommodation that I realized I could use anytime while working from home was stimming. And this is also a habit I've had my entire life. And until I was diagnosed, I didn't know that this was something that other people on the autism spectrum did. Stimming is any type of self-soothing activity that people on the spectrum do to help them kind of regulate the environment and regulate their bodies and themselves. Some people might fidget, do things with their hands. They might tap on things. Other people prefer textures. For me, my lifelong stimming has been scratching satin ribbons. I've done this my entire life. And the way I'm situated when I'm teaching is I can do this for an entire class off camera and still focus on what my students are doing. My hands are busy. My hands aren't doodling or doing anything else, which is something I would have also done in a physical classroom, but I could still focus on the environment and it helped me stay relaxed. In fact, I'm stimming right now. Another thing that helped is that before classes, and this is something that I would do in the physical classroom as well, is that I would make sure all my materials and everything was ready to go the day before. This is also something I did at home. Having all the materials on the desktop ready to click on and present, have the relevant textbooks and assessment materials next to my laptop ready to go, so that when that 10-minute alarm went off, I wasn't scrambling. At most, I was making sure my coffee was ready so I could sit down and let students into the Zoom room. This past semester in spring 2021, my university decided to go back to face-to-face. This had a lot of challenges, and that's an understatement. Instructors had to deal with classrooms that were windows were open, we had sanitation stations, we had to constantly remind students to social distance, and a lot of classrooms weren't set up for students to have the necessary amount of distance from each other. Many classrooms had plexiglass partitions, but they were inconsistent. They were not in all classrooms, and they limited instructor movement. Another challenge that stood out to me right away is, despite not teaching in front of students in a classroom for a year, as soon as I started it, all of my old teaching habits came back. Like, even though my teaching mask was on, I was moving around, I was animated, even though I was wearing a mask and a face shield. I couldn't stand still. And that was something that they enforced that faculty needed to do. Stay in front of the classroom, stand still, don't move. So that was a huge challenge. I had to train myself not to move around and to stay at the front of the room. This meant working on projecting my voice, making sure I was constantly making contact with as many different students as I could, looking very carefully for any signs of understanding or confusion, which is even harder when everyone's wearing masks. I also was in a position where I needed to help address instructor concerns with what to do in classrooms that could not accommodate students, or where there were other issues with students. And even though a lot of this was carried out over email, because we were all on campus again for the first 3 weeks, this meant a lot of unplanned run-ins with instructors where I might have been bombarded with questions. And another person might not think you're being bombarded, but for someone whose brain doesn't quite adapt well to sudden upheavals, everything just kind of feels overwhelming. So suddenly being thrust back into that environment. However, as I just said, this only lasted for 3 weeks. There were cases on campus. There were other safety issues, and with the ongoing states of emergency, the university switched back to online after the first 3 weeks of class. Luckily, we had the prior experience of being online and just updating materials to make sure instructors knew how to explain and get their students back to online. That went relatively smoothly. Suddenly, I was back in the environment where everything was happening once again in the same space. I was seated in a chair, so I wasn't moving around, but I was able to accommodate myself again by stimming. I was able to accommodate myself by having very strict boundaries on my environments, which device is being used for which type of task and when. Making sure that I was, meeting the demands of work and being very clear about asking for when things were due and the specifics of tasks. One program or application that is extremely useful for me is the Google List, which is their checklist app, because you can categorize it, you can add additional notes, you can add deadlines. Any sort of checklist app helps me stay very aware of deadlines, and it helps me stay very organized. And also setting up weekly reminders so that every week when you have a certain class, so every Tuesday at 9 a.m., you'll get the same reminder: check grades for this class, submit grades for this class, check these assignments. It keeps the routine going. The less that's in your head and the more that's kept on an application or on a physical sheet of paper makes it a lot less overwhelming. Also, another thing that helped is that in my position, I was also made chief of a course for the fall, and giving myself as much time as possible to plan for every eventuality for that has made the upcoming semester a little less overwhelming, although as of this presentation, we still don't know what format that's going to be in. So for a lot of instructors, that creates a lot of anxiety. For me personally, it's trying to take comfort in knowing I've been through multiple scenarios before, so I know how I can teach certain classes, but knowing that things can happen, knowing that things can change suddenly remains a huge source of anxiety and concern. And especially in knowing this, in addition to being diagnosed with ADHD and ASD. It's one thing to tell people that you might feel anxious because they might go, oh yeah, me too, but explaining that normal coping mechanisms or being able to distract myself or take my mind off something, it may not work as easily for me as it may work for others. And sometimes being able to vocalize those special those things that are concerning, especially to you, and how you might struggle with them. And that if other people suggest, have you tried doing things a different way? Have you tried a different approach? Have you tried a different program? Those don't come as easily to neurodivergent instructors. We may find a technique or style or approach that works, and then we stick with it for the next 5, 10, or 15 years because it's familiar, it's comfortable, it's something that we feel comfortable in carrying out in our classes. Even switching online for the very first time was extremely jarring because it was full of a lot of unknowns. I don't even think I learned how to comfortably share a screen until halfway through the semester. When I was giving a demo lesson over Zoom to new instructors, I just held up the book. So it took a very long time to acclimate myself to these new environments. And that's true for many instructors, but it's something that's especially worth keeping in mind for neurodivergent faculty. That's not to say we don't catch on to things quickly, but it takes us a long time to mentally prepare ourselves for these situations and changes and to mentally adapt in a way that works for us, that keeps us not from not being underwhelmed, from not being overwhelmed, and from not being in a situation where we might shut down and just not interact at all. Before I finish, I want to share some general tips that have also helped me and some resources that helped me when I was initially diagnosed. So some general tips that have helped me, not just in teaching, but mainly in life, but here I'll talk from the viewpoint of teaching, is the idea of mental preparation. This is something that this is a phrase that my mother used a lot when I was growing up, and it wasn't until I was diagnosed, I was like, maybe she knew something. But in this case, mentally preparing for the next semester. And this is where those to-do lists can come in. Make a to-do list of questions that you have. Any question. What classroom am I in? What textbook am I using? What's the syllabus? What are the due dates? What about student absences? Every question, get it on a list. As long as it's out of your head, it's still stressful, but a little less. Make note of which questions you can confidently answer. If you can answer the questions, then that gives you even more control of the situation. Maybe you may not know the extent of student absentee exemptions, but at least you know what classroom you're in and what textbook you're using. Identify as best as you can whom you can contact about the unknowns. Maybe it's been gone over in a meeting and you might need to review notes, or maybe it's something that other people have similar questions about. You could be the one to bring it to their attention. Also, seek support and advocacy from colleagues, but for neurodivergent faculty, keep in mind that not all neurotypical colleagues may fully understand your disorders. And in some cases, if you come out to them with these disorders, you might get the reaction of, but you're so organized, but you're teaching, but you're living in Japan. You couldn't possibly have this. It's called, autism spectrum disorder is called, it's a spectrum for a reason. It is in various forms. So there are millions of different faces for this disorder. Also, another way that can help without revealing the disorder is that you can speak from the viewpoint of your symptoms. In social situations, you can express that you're uncomfortable in situations where there are many faculty you don't know. What can you do? Or if there's a situation where you are assigned multiple tasks at once, ask about how to prioritize. Ask the person who's assigning you these tasks, which one do you need done first? Which is the most important for you that I need to get done first? When are these due? And just keep pressing until you can get some concrete answers. And if there's any pushback, you can explain that for you to provide the best results for a particular task, you need to work with very clear boundaries. And hopefully they will understand that. When I was diagnosed, of the two diagnoses I received, autism spectrum disorder was the most daunting and still is, and it had a lot of questions. Many of the books I sought out, as you can see, were written by women who were also diagnosed as adults, as this is a demographic that is slowly emerging as with a lot of women being diagnosed in their 20s and 30s and beyond, because we were overlooked when we were growing up. All of these books are available on Amazon and Kindle, and they may possibly help you or someone you might be working with. For ADHD, I've found some podcasts that have been helpful in a variety of topics. Hacking Your ADHD handles everyday tasks and also long-term issues such as multitasking and burnout. Attitude and ADHD experts brings in guest lecturers to talk about lifetime issues. They might focus on childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, or just general situations for people with ADHD, learning disabilities. Sometimes they do talk about ASD as well. Finally, for those of you in Japan, if you're not already aware, there's telecounseling. They do offer online counseling through their website, and they are available to talk through multiple platforms. I've been working with my therapist online through the pandemic, and it's been extremely helpful in helping me better understand things in this chaotic time. I want to thank you again for listening to this presentation. I hope that these experiences help you better understand the situation that many neurodivergent instructors might have been facing during this time. And maybe you were able to connect to some of them yourself as well. If you ever have any questions, you're welcome to contact me. Thank you again. And I hope you enjoy the other videos at this conference.